So it turns out that if Canadians have to swallow budget medicine, they'd rather get the spoon from Dr. Carney than Nurse Nope.
But both guys better read the label. It says, do not mix with a snap election.
Abacus says empathy beats austerity. Nano says people want jobs, healthcare, and housing, not grandstanding.
So if Pierre forces a Christmas election, he's ignoring the first rule of politics. Don't make people hate you and the holidays.
Bottom line, Carney's problem is numbers, Poilievre's problem is math and people.
Here's what's really on the line tomorrow. Mark Carney's got 169 Liberal seats. That's 11 short of a majority. To survive the budget vote, he needs just 3 friends across the aisle. The problem is, there are no friends left in Ottawa.
Right now, it's less House of Commons and more House of Cardiac Arrest. The Bloc Québécois says oui only when they get a Quebec bonus, bigger pensions, more health transfers, a couple of billion in infrastructure to keep their bonjour budget happy.
In other words, they're probably voting no.
And then there's the NDP. 7 MPs, no money, no leader, and no idea what to do. They're publicly slamming austerity, but quietly looking for an abstain button so that they don't look like Liberal lapdogs again.
So picture Carney at the poker table. He's holding a minority hand, the opposition's counting votes, and the dealer just announced, next card, confidence motion.
It's like Survivor Ottawa edition, except the prize is running the country, not a beach chair and a lobster fest.
And if this budget gets voted down, Canadians head to the poll for the second time in a year.
Because, nothing says happy holidays like another election ad between the turkey and Boxing Day sales.
So, while Canadians are budgeting for Christmas, Carney's budgeting for the century. He calls it generational investment. Pierre calls it reckless spending.
Well, either way, somebody's math is about to be tested.
After 9 days of handshakes and trade across Asia, Mark Carney came home with a message. Canada is entering a new era. This is our moment to define our next century.
That's the thesis of the whole budget, turning the economy from one of reliance to resilience. In other words, less dependent on the United States and more capable of standing on our own 2 snowshoes.
He's promising what he calls generational investments. That's political code for spend money now so the next generation doesn't curse us later.
Yeah, think housing construction, military modernization, and help for industries hammered by Trump's tariffs. It's big, bold, and, according to his team, paid for with trims to the bureaucracy that ballooned under the last government.
But he's also warning that not every dollar survives the cut. Carney says the budget includes cuts to rein in spending after Trudeau-era ballooning, which, to be fair, it did survive a pandemic.
True. So, he's really trying to pull off a political tightrope act. Invest where it counts, trim where it doesn't.
And he's making it clear he'll stand by it no matter what. I'm 100% confident this is the right budget for this country at this moment. This is not a game. I'm always prepared to stand up for the right thing.
Coming from a former central banker, that's basically a battle cry in perfect monotone.
Right? You can almost hear the calculator's salute.
He's betting that Canadians want competence with compassion. Someone who knows the numbers but still remembers that rent is due on the 1st.
And while he's trying to balance investment and restraint, Pierre Poilievre's already yelling from the chief seats that Carney wants a costly election.
And when asked point blank if he'd trigger an election, Poilievre dodged it with, "We want an affordable budget. We will not vote to raise grocery prices and increase housing costs."
That's not a plan, that's a slogan in search of a spreadsheet.
Which brings us to the real story, the pre-blame parade, and the $42 billion bluff.
Here's the conservative strategy in a nutshell. Build an impossible checklist, then blame the government when it can't be met.
Pierre Poilievre gave Carney 3 conditions for support. Scrap the industrial carbon price, cut income and capital gains taxes, and still keep the deficit under $42 billion.
That's like saying, I'll go vegan as long as steak's on the menu. You can't cut every source of revenue and then complain that the math doesn't work.
But this isn't really about arithmetic, is it? It's projection politics. If the Conservatives vote down the budget, They'll say, well, Carney wanted an election all along.
You know, it's like they break the window and then they yell, "Who threw that?"
It's classic pre-blame, right? Meanwhile, Carney's message is simple. He's ready to defend his plan, but he's not chasing a campaign.
And according to Abacus, Canadians agree. 45% trust Carney to deliver tough news. 38% trust Poilievre. Goes to show empathy beats outrage.
And remember, if this budget fails, we're back to the polls before the snow melts.
So what do you think? Will the budget pass, or are we heading for another election? Drop your thoughts in the comments because we want to hear from you.
Now, let's talk about what Pierre Poilievre actually said this week, and what's true, what's half true, and what's fiction.
If you've seen the clips, it's a masterclass in confidence, but not accuracy.
On Rosemary Barton Live, Pierre said the deficit must stay at $42 billion because the year is mostly spent.
It sounds responsible until you remember he's also demanding tax cuts at the same time. Income, capital gains, carbon, the works. You can't promise to spend less money and take in less money without explaining what you're cutting.
It's like announcing that you're on a diet and then doubling the dessert. If he really kept the deficit at $42 billion, whole programs would have to go. Possibly defense upgrades, housing construction, even support for workers hurt by U.S. tariffs. He doesn't say that part out loud, does he?
Then there's his favorite slogan, "The cost of government drives the cost of living."
Which is catchy, but it's also way too simple. Yes, spending can fuel inflation if it's out of control, but prices spiked because of supply shocks, shipping, oil, and interest rates.
Inflation hit every major economy, dude. Saying Ottawa alone made eggs expensive is a bedtime story.
He also said that he'd scrap what he calls the industrial carbon tax on farmers, the fuel standard tax, and food packaging tax.
Okay, reality check. There is no federal food packaging tax. Plastics and packaging rules exist, but that's regulation and producer fees upstream. It's not a new line on your grocery receipt.
And that 17-cent gas hike he pins on clean fuel regulations, that's a 2030 scenario, not today. Current impact is way smaller.
So criticize the policy if you want, but you can't time travel the price tag.
He's also pitching the notwithstanding clause for criminal cases, something no federal government has ever done.
And listen, the anger is real. We don't want predators just walking free. But the precedent would be huge. It's one thing to promise tougher sentencing. It's another to start overriding the charter whenever the verdict isn't popular.
Then, to trade. He claims every time Carney travels abroad, tariffs go up. China, India, the UK.
That's not how this works, Pierre. Those were broader retaliation cycles tied to U.S. moves. It wasn't Carney lands, Delhi raises the price of peas. It was a global tit for tat, not a personal fail.
He also promised a Canadian Sovereignty Act to fast-track pipelines, LNG, ports, all the big builds. We do need faster approvals for sure, but you're not putting together IKEA furniture here. You still need buyers, financing, permits, and years of construction.
Cut the red tape is a nice line, but you still need the pipe, the paperwork, and the planet to agree.
And then there's the line he keeps repeating, another one. We haven't seen the budget yet.
Which sounds reasonable until you realize he's pretending to keep an open mind while already trashing it in every interview.
If you were genuinely waiting for it, you wouldn't be calling it costly and irresponsible before it's even tabled.
That's not patience, that's pre-spin. The NDP are at least saying, we'll wait and see. Pierre's saying, I'll wait and say no.
He's not reading the budget, he's rehearsing the campaign ad.
So here's the reality check. No, there isn't a food packaging tax. No, gas isn't up 17 cents because of the clean fuel rules today. No, inflation wasn't caused by one budget. And no, you can't fast-track mega projects with a slogan.
You also can't balance a $42 billion budget while slashing revenue either. Not without cutting something big. And he hasn't said what that is, has he?
That's the difference between auditioning to be prime minister and being prime minister. Carney's dealing with the math. Poilievre's dealing with the marketing.
And when the budget does hit tomorrow, one of them has to show their work.
So before anyone spikes that football, here's where Canadians actually stand. Abacus says if there's tough budget news, people would rather hear it from Prime Minister Mark Carney than Pierre Poilievre. 45% to 38%.
And that tracks with the mood of the country. Carney's at 46% approval with a 14-point positive net rating. Poilievre's slightly underwater, 39 approve, 42 disapprove, a -3 net. Now it's not a landslide, but just enough that people see competence as the safer pair of hands.
But it's not a free pass for Carney either. Nanos found that the country is split. 47% are okay with a deficit to invest. 48% want tighter belts. So it's basically a coin toss.
And the shopping list is clear. Number 1, healthcare. Then housing. Then some relief on the cost of living. After that, defense and help for industries getting squeezed by tariffs.
Abacus also asked what's keeping people up at night, and 62% said the cost of living. Only 37% put Donald in their top worries. So if tomorrow's budget is built around kitchen table issues, it's speaking the language that voters actually use.
Which means 2 things. 1, Carney can talk big projects, but he has to show near-term help. Faster builds, visible wins, fewer hoops. And 2, if Poilievre wants to be Mr. Affordability, he has to stop calling every policy a tax and start explaining how he'll protect healthcare and housing while cutting revenue.
Canadians are basically saying, invest where it counts. Don't blow the doors off, and please don't drag us into another election just to prove a point.
So tomorrow's test is simple, right? Does the budget meet those priorities without cutting into services people rely on? If yes, it earns time. If not, patience runs out fast.
And economists, they aren't saying slam on the brakes of spending. They're saying spend smart.
That means capacity, not cosmetics. Build more homes, fix bottlenecks, shore up supply chains, and modernize the defense industrial base. Trim the low-value stuff to make room.
In plain English, that means invest to grow the country and keep a lid on the overhead.
So if tomorrow's budget does that, near-term housing starts, faster permits awarded, targeted industry support, and shows restraint on bureaucracy, it'll read as growing up economics, not a shopping spree.
Here's what we'll be watching for. Do housing dollars translate into shovels in months, not years?
Do defense commitments mean Canadian steel, aluminum, and jobs, or just more foreign procurement?
Is there real tariff relief for workers and firms on the front lines, and not just those press releases?
And if the NDP balks at austerity, do we see abstentions to avoid an election or a hard no?
So yeah, all eyes are on that confidence vote. But honestly, confidence seems to be running a little low in Ottawa these days.
Especially after Pierre Poilievre's interview on Rosemary Barton. We're going to talk about interprovincial trade, but that performance deserved its own episode.
Yeah, sometimes the story just grabs you by the headline or the ears. When Pierre talks, it's like watching a bad high school debater who's never had a real job.
He's not debating ideas, he's auditioning for outrage. And when the stakes are this high, a budget that could topple the government, Canadians deserve better than slogans.
Meanwhile, Carney's trying to talk policy like an adult. After 9 days in Asia, he came home with a message that actually had verbs in it.
We'll get to interprovincial trade barriers soon, we promise.
But right now, we're focusing on budgets, election threats, and that 60 Minutes interview that felt more like a bad SNL sketch than journalism.
The headlines keep spinning faster than the facts, but we'll keep showing up to cut through the noise and keep you in the loop.
Because democracy's complicated, but it shouldn't be confusing.
So before you go, don't forget, you can join the A-Team for early access, behind-the-scenes extras, and our private community chats.
You can also find us on Substack, where we dig even deeper into the stories that don't always make it into the headlines.
And yes, the new Keep Calm and Carney on mugs are finally here. They're flying off the shelves faster than Pierre's talking points.
It's a perfect way to start your morning. Caffeine, clarity, and a little Canadian common sense.
And if you know someone who's fallen for the spin, you know, the half-truths, the slogans, the everything's on fire routine, then share this video with them.
Facts spread slower than fear, but they last a whole lot longer.
So hit like, subscribe, and keep the conversation going.
Because democracy's a team sport, and this team's just getting started. See you next time.
Thanks for watching.